Hi, my name is Kevin and I collect old irons. I don't really collect either the travel irons or the electric irons. I'm interested more in the older stuff. But I did want to increase my meager collection of travel irons for the previous video by buying maybe a couple of the electric irons. And I had no idea. If you search on collectibles on eBay for travel irons, you find well more than 1,000 listings. Most of these are from the 1930s to 1960s. They come from all kinds of countries, and there's an incredible range of interesting, gadgety ideas to make irons lightweight and compact. It is a very interesting group, and a group that iron collectors usually don't get into, but they are worth our consideration. The British and the Germans really took the lead in the early 1900s in the development of travel irons, these usually using either alcohol or metafuel. And those designs still saw common use in the 1930s, but it was inevitable that those countries turned their eye to electricity. This is a German travel iron in a rather weathered leather case. We take the cord out. Here's the iron. We'll take a look at this in a moment. And here's the trivet. There are no markings. Actually, I only know it's German because it says in very fine print on the bottom of the trivet, made in Germany. The handle swings upwards, has a kind of wicker sheathing to it, and there are 3 terminals in the back, and inside there is a small envelope with a typewritten card that reads as follows. Always place one connection on center plug as this connects the voltage. For domestic use, place other connection on plug marked 100/125. For European use, place on plug marked 200/240. So for American use, I would place these terminals on the 2 to the right. For German use, I place on the 2 on the left. This iron actually was imported in the United States and intended for use solely in the United States, so the terminal on the left is plugged. And on the other side, I have a traditional American plug, but I can plug this in to an adapter so that when I travel, I can screw this into a light socket to power this up. And here is a fairly early English travel iron. As with most of the irons in the 1920s and thereabouts, they come in very nice, beautifully made travel boxes. We have here the iron itself, and I also have the plug and various kinds of adapters so it can be used again in a light socket or in England or the United States. The iron itself, this is a Fox travel iron, and it has, if I pull this up a little bit, I can bring this up, and that puts the handle in place. Whether this folding handle was first invented in England or whether this follows some of the American inventions from the 1930s, I'm not sure. For use in Europe or in the United States, there are 2 sets of plugs. The top set of 2 plugs are for 110 to 120 volts, and the bottom is for 220 to 140 volts. Here is another British iron. It fits very tightly in a compact tin box. The British love tin boxes. The iron bottom is here and the handle is separate. I have to put it on and then screw it in place. Has a little wire stand. The plug here goes in the back. The end is American. These were imported in the United States in about a decade after the end of World War II. Very common. You see them all over the place in antique shops, flea markets, and on eBay. Note the very compact design, lightweight nature of these things, and how well these fit nicely into a box that can weather the wear and tear of travel. I do think that the travel irons in this video have a European ancestry, and so that's why we showed some European irons first. But for the most part, everything we're going to see for the rest of this video is American. The Americans came in a very big way about 1930 and dominated the scene with a lot of clever, interesting, gadgety kinds of handles and so forth until about the 1970s, when Asian countries and others then came in and took over the scene. Our first American-made electric travel iron is this, again in a nice, neat little case. These cases came in here are very compact because it just holds the iron, but also larger cases that held clothing pins and other laundry maintenance items. The iron itself is the Baby Betsy Ross, made by the Central Flatiron Manufacturing Company in New York. You've heard of that name before because that was the same company that made this natural gas iron that we saw in an earlier video. This made about 25 years before the electric iron here. Why clothespins? Those of you who have done some international travel, even today in places like Japan and parts of Europe, let alone the third world, know that a dryer is hard to find. I have spent some time overseas in an apartment that had a washing machine but no dryer. Instead, I would have a clothesline and I'd pin my fabric up to dry. In the earlier days, a traveling salesman probably had a long night after a long day of washing perhaps their key shirt in the sink, then pinning it up, drying it, perhaps ironing it in the morning before they went to work, and doing other maintenance duties as well. That was the kind of things that one did as a traveling salesman in those times. Both the packaging and the light socket termination say that this iron is from the 1920s, maybe early 1930s. The Betsy Ross irons did the compact and lightweight thing by simply making a standard iron very tiny. The handle is rigidly connected to the base, does not fold, and so forth as the irons that we'll see that follow. The Americans really got into the picture in the late 1920s when they came up with the idea that rather than these small compact irons, you could have actually a much larger iron that simply had a handle that you could fold aside, and that would make a very compact structure. And once this was figured out, all kinds of American companies went into the picture, because this was the cat's meow, very popular idea. There was no moving parts, and this was at a time when Americans were becoming much more mobile. The Ford Model A began use in 1928. The earliest patent I can find for one of these American travel irons with removable handles is assigned to the Landers, Fleury and Clark Company of New Britain, Connecticut. The patent was filed in 1925, approved in 1931, so I think these went into manufacture in the late 1920s. And this would be an early version of this company, which had a long history, and by the way, usually went by the trade name Universal. This particular one has a handle that you unscrew and then it simply slides off. Another American travel iron you see very commonly on eBay is the Greyhound, manufactured by the Middleton and Meads Company in Baltimore, Maryland. I don't have any year for this company. I don't have any patents for this company. It does have the Bakelite handle, and it also has a handle that disattaches from a screw very simply. I think these were manufactured in the late pre-war, World War II, and then also for some number of years after the war. Um, as with many of the American companies, they dispensed with the fancy and rather expensive boxes and instead went to these simple pouches. Nap Monarch was a major company starting with several patents from the 1930s. There were many versions, usually with this broad plate at the bottom and Bakelite handles. The handles fold to the side. The plug is usually at an angle, and later versions, such as this one, actually have a little temperature indicator. What you would do is you would plug it in and wait until the dial pointed to rayon, silk, wool, cotton, linen, whatever was the right temperature, and then you would unplug it and use it. The Winstead Manufacturing Company from Winstead, Connecticut, building on several patents from the 1930s, had a series of irons under the Durabuilt name. This particular one has a nice case with a scissors and a thimble and threads and all that. And that and the low model number suggests that this is from the 1930s. The iron had a Bakelite handle and a handle that would come up and be latched at the back. So again, this is the model 101. Here is the model 206, and this one had a little lighting here that tells you when the temperature was appropriate for silk, wool, cotton, linen, etc. Again, you'd unplug and then use the iron. And those model numbers go up into the 600s or 700s, and I've seen other indications to suggest that these were in business until the 1960s, 1970s. There were other ways to make the handle move to make for a more compact iron. This is the Handy Hot from the Chicago Electric Company. This is called a folding iron. The handle here is wood. Latches onto this, and then you can unlatch and push it forward. Another early iron that was made more compact by a handle that dipped forward is this General Electric iron. I can pull this back, and I have a little strut that I could pull out, and I'll have to pull this out and plug that in, and I'm ready to go. This particular style had a history that lasted for several decades. This is an early one, probably previous to World War II. The strut here pulls the handle up. Later versions did not have this. It simply dips up and down. Later versions yet had a thermostat with a little dial that you could turn, and even later versions than that had that somewhat expanded by a middle area that had other things that you could adjust. General Electric, long history. The irons that we've talked about here with improvements carry us into the 1970s, and that is where we started bringing in imports from Asian countries, particularly Japan. The iron I want to show here is from Taiwan, and it is typical of many of the clever ideas that came from overseas. It has a handle. This is the handle that is around the side. You can pull it off, and then, and I have to play around with this a little bit. There we are. There is a thermostat. That's a very lightly built iron. There are many versions from a number of companies. Some of them had containers for water in the front and served as steam irons. I should tell you the story about this iron. I had intended to make this exclusively American irons after the short introduction with things European, but then this iron came up. This iron was on eBay, posted with a starting bid of 0.01, a penny. Postage $8.40. Well, I don't know. Sure, I'll put a penny on that. And promptly forgot about it. The auction wasn't going to be finished for several days later. And Kate, who monitors the eBay side of things, said, Kevin, you got something on eBay again? And I said, no, I haven't bid on anything eBay all this week. Oh, yes, I had. And so this iron cost me $8.41. And the remarkable thing about all the irons that I'm talking about in this video is that I picked them up over a matter of a few weeks off eBay, and not a one of them did I pay more than $11 or $12 plus postage. Several of these, this one as an example, I bought for less than $10 including postage. There are many of these things out there and very inexpensive, and there are so many that you can look around and wait until you find the one that has practically mint condition with the original box, the original pouch, sometimes the papers and so forth. It is an interesting group. Not a group that I expected to find interesting, and not a group that I expected to be spending any money on. But there they are. And this takes us to something a little more modern, state of the art. Modern here being an iron that, looking at the papers within, is from the mid 1980s, so merely 35 years old. And again, has that little pouch in here. This is a steam iron. You can take this up and pour water into it, and then put the handle on here, and there you can control the steam. It's got a thermostat and so forth. Interesting. Oh, and this is a Sunbeam made in the USA, and just while we're thinking about it, we might as well get this and let this stand a little bit in contrast with the Sunbeam that we finished the last video with. This being, again, about the 1920s in this nice metal box, this being 1985, so you're looking at about 60 years worth of history. And one more clever American idea. You might think this is a suitcase, but this is an iron. I gotta unscrew something here. I have a plug here I can plug in, and this is an iron, which I can then use this as the ironing board. There are so many interesting things in the business of these electric travel irons, and I thank you for your time. Please subscribe if you will. Look forward to your comments, and we'll get back into the older irons once more.